so we have started a series where we are breaking down Taylor Swift songs from the perspective as readers. We are breaking her lyrics down like we would kind of break down a book. So we are starting with Maroon. This is one of Tammy's favorite songs.
It is. It is one of my favorite songs. And I don't know, I feel like it's one of her best ones on Midnights. I mean, there's, other good ones on there, but I feel like just the production of this song, too, how it sounds, kind of the cadence that she does and how she's, saying some of these words is just, I don't know, it's very different, and I like it. So I put that I feel like this song has changed a lot over the last few years. I feel like when Midnights first came out, we maybe thought this was a callback to the Red era. Then maybe it could have been about Carly at one point. And then when Tortured Poets came out, I felt like maybe it could, because of one of the songs, I can't remember which one, she talks about Maroon. So then we're like, well, is it about Maddie Healy? Which I'm pretty much going to ignore that because I'm not going to have one of my favorite songs be about him. But I think personally it is reflecting back to the Red era. I feel like Midnights came out after Red, where she was spending all that time going back to that point of time in her life. And then everything that came with All Too Well 10-minute version, doing the short film and just all the emotions that came back from that time that she was able to write this song from a more grown-up perspective of it, and realizing that it was more of a darker red and more of maroon.
And Taylor does like to use colors for
people.
Yeah, and to represent certain things. So red is very much passion, and usually when we hear Red, in the Red album, whether it's the song Red or just other references to it, it's been about Jake.
Yeah, and now she's kind of turned it on itself with using maroon as it being a darker shade, deeper, more depth in it, maybe a little bit of brown that makes it that darker shade. So, it feels a little bit more grown up. And even the song itself, the production is a little bit on the sexy side, I feel like. She's in her low register a lot. So I feel like it's very different than what, kind of Red was in that poppy era. I feel like this is more the gothic kind of darker side of things as well.
Yeah. It's interesting too because thinking of Maroon as more the grown-up version of All Too Well, because Would Have, Could Have, Should Have is the grown-up version of Dear John.
Yeah.
So
I know. And she said that Midnights was a time that was 13 nights that she's reflecting on her life. So it would make sense that was a big part. I mean, we got a whole album, even though it was a short relationship, we got a whole album pretty much dedicated to it. So it wouldn't surprise me that, of course, on Midnights that she wouldn't be reflecting on that era. And then also during the Midnights era, she had liked a TikTok about someone comparing the Red album to Maroon. So that's kind of a little bit of a glimpse of her maybe confirming a little bit when she's liking those kind of things.
Yeah.
So the first verse is really interesting because it's a whole sentence almost, but how she says it kind of, I put kind of makes you feel like maybe you're drunk or disoriented, because she's when the morning came, we were cleaning incense off your vinyl shelf. We lost track of time again. The way she says those lines is it's one sentence, but it's not. She breaks it up in a way that you're kind of and then the production going that you're okay, maybe we are a little disoriented here. Laughing with your feet in your lap, with my feet in your lap, you were my closest friend. How we end up on the floor anyway. You say your roommate's cheap ass screw top rosé. That's how I see you every day now.
I did think it was interesting that you had pointed out that when she says your roommate's cheap ass screw top rosé, you say could either apply to that or
the response.
How'd we end up on the floor anyway? You say. Sorry, I said that backwards. But yeah, how'd we end up on the floor anyway? You say could apply to that or your roommate's cheap ass screw top rosé.
So it's hard to see who's actually saying it. Who has the roommate? Is the roommate actually a thing, or was it just a way to add a 2-syllable word into that to kind of make it flow? Because that your roommate's cheap ass screw top rose reminds me very much of from King of My Heart, which the production is very similar to King of My Heart, where she says in the bridge, "Is this the end of all the endings?" Mm-hmm. So it's very similar to that, which I feel like King of My Heart is about Joe. So, you know, there you had saw something too about that, didn't you? About what people were like poking fun at Joe.
I had seen a few people think that your roommate's cheap ass screw top rose is a like poke at Joe for being poor. I mean, poor.
Yeah, I know.
I don't know how I feel about that. Maybe, but that's kind of weird.
I feel like that's very much a fandom thing. Like, I don't think. I think Taylor has like gave us details about things, because I feel like it came from the one song where she says like at the yogurt shop that you used to work at, and I feel like people were like taking that as like, oh, he had like a regular job, so he was like poor, and I like don't think that Taylor would ever call anyone out for not having as much money as her, especially someone that she like loves. Even now, I don't think she would be like, "Oh, you're poor," because like in comparison,
everyone's poor compared to Taylor.
Yeah. So like, there's not a lot of people that are in her tax bracket, and she doesn't want to be with anyone that's in her tax bracket anyway.
And maybe that was an inside joke between them too. Like maybe they joked about his roommate or whoever having cheap ass wine all the time.
Yeah. At some point, someone had a roommate that had it, or maybe it wasn't like a specific roommate. Maybe it was like a sibling or like something like that. Who knows? Mm-hmm. I think that's more of us poking fun at Joe and calling him poor than it is really her doing that. And then I feel like this first verse very much is in the moment too. Where we get into the second verse, she's kind of looking back at it. So she's really good. I think she does it in Holy Ground too, where she's good at giving us like a snapshot of a moment. Like sometimes she'll give us the entire relationship in a song, but other times she'll do an entire song about like one moment, or like a verse about a specific moment. Like we're here, we're drinking wine, and there's, incense on the vinyl shelf. So like that kind of stuff, where this whole verse is about one specific moment. And then she says, "I see you every day now," which is like, could be a couple of different things. Either like they legitimately are together all the time now, or, or she's just saying it matter of factly, like not really as in a good thing, but not really as a bad thing. But kind of just setting up as like this relationship where I feel like, she thought it was going somewhere.
Okay. And I chose you, the one I was dancing with, in New York, no shoes, looked up at the sky, and it was the burgundy on my t-shirt when you splashed your wine into me, and how the blood rushed into my cheeks, so scarlet it was, the mark they saw on my collarbone, the rust that grew between telephones, the lips I used to call home, so scarlet it was maroon.
I didn't realize that this whole section was the chorus until we used Genius. I thought the burgundy on my t-shirt, I thought that was what we were getting into the chorus, and maybe this first part was the pre-chorus.
Yeah.
But it's putting all of this into the chorus. I thought it was interesting too. In the middle of the chorus, she shifts the melody. So when she gets into the burgundy on my t-shirt, it's a completely different melody than the first part, that I chose you, the one I was dancing with, which she does on a few other songs like Question and New Romantics. Halfway through the chorus, she will change the melody. And I mean, New York, I feel like there's so many references to New York. I feel like Taylor Swift is New York.
Yeah.
From, Red era, and then 1999 with Welcome to New York, to Cornelia Street with Joe. So I feel like New York isn't, it's like the colors we kind of associate with specific people, where I feel like New York isn't a specific thing. I feel like that's her main home.
Yeah.
And, Taylor is New York.
Oh, one thing that I had noticed and kind of read about was that she says the one I was dancing with. So it can either be the one I was dancing with, or she has a pause when she's singing it. She says, the one I was dancing with. So is she saying that this person was the one? And is that why she put that pause in there?
Yeah. Or is it that whole just kind of like breaking it up just to kind of feel the whole disoriented, like how she did at the beginning with breaking up that kind of stuff. So I mean, and the one from Folklore, right?
Mm-hmm. And we do see other references to Taylor talking about like dancing. She says dance, and here she says dancing with, in New York, no shoes. So I mean, in Cornelia Street, she talks about being barefoot in the kitchen, and in All Too Well, she talks about dancing around in the refrigerator light. So I just thought those were interesting, especially for All Too Well, because we do think that, you know, this might be the grown-up version of All Too Well.
Mm-hmm. I feel like she's very hopeful in this first part of the chorus, versus when we get to like the first part, and then the latter half of the chorus, she kind of loses that.
Mm-hmm.
And she really doesn't say Maroon at all until the very end. You know, you splash your wine into me, and then it was so scarlet it was. Like, she doesn't really say Maroon until that very last part.
Mm-hmm.
And then I do feel like these are things calling big on Red. Like, what does she say? The lips I used to call home. She references calling a lot on Red with
Mm-hmm.
you called me up again and break me like a promise. And then in We're Never Getting Back Together, you called me up again last night. And then in Babe, last time I'll call you Babe. So there's a lot of like phone, I think, a lot with the Red era. And I feel like, you know, that could be calling to that as well.
Even in I Almost Do, she keeps talking about almost calling him up.
Yeah. So, and the rust that grew between telephones, like, I feel like the phone was a big part of that Red era.
Mm-hmm.
And even in, like, the All Too Well short film, we, like, see Sadie crying on the bed, and he's, like, obviously calling her up again.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where a lot of this, as I was breaking down, I really feel like this is calling back, pun intended, to Red more than some of the other stuff. But, you know, I could be wrong.
I do think it's interesting how she says, I don't know, just the different types of red she uses. Like, burgundy is a more purpley kind of red. And then we have scarlet. Like, scarlet is a more, like, bright red. To me, that's more of, like, almost kind of like a blood red.
Yeah. Then we have rust, which is more of, like, that orange red.
Mm-hmm.
And then lips. I mean, everyone's got, like, a different shade of, like, a red lip.
Yeah.
Just naturally.
The mark they saw on my collarbone, some kind of, like, hickey.
Yeah.
You know.
And they saw, so it's about, like, somebody else seeing that mark on her. All right, so verse 2, when the silence came, we were shaking, blind and hazy. How the hell did we lose sight of us again? Sobbing with your head in your hands. Ain't that the way shit always ends? You were standing hollow-eyed in the hallway. Carnations you had thought were roses. That's us. I feel you no matter what. The rubies that I gave up. I feel like in, like, Red, it was very much a back and forth relationship, you know. He would call her up again after, like, 3 months in the grave, and, you know, it was on again, off again.
He wouldn't leave her alone.
No, wouldn't leave her alone, or when things were, like, I don't know, when he felt things, which, like, she was drifting away, then he would, like, wanted to pull her back in, like, once she was out of it. Or I put them when he finally realized he lost the only real thing he's ever known.
Yeah.
And so he starts crying about it. Like, you know, once he's realized he's kind of lost that power dynamic. Because I think he liked that he was older and kind of had that over her. And then once he lost that, like, you know, he's crying. And I feel like the way she responds is a little sassy. Like, ain't that the way shit always ends? Like, it's always, like, you crying when I'm, like, completely done and, like, out of this relationship.
And that is the way shit always ends. I feel like with, you know, relationships and stuff like that, it always feels like, at least, like, me and my friends, you know, like, it always felt like the girl was the one that was devastated initially. The guy didn't really care. And then after a little while, and the girl was kind of like, you know, I'm feeling better, like, I'm kind of over it.
Yeah.
He pops up and now is in his feelings and is like, hey, I miss you. And you're like, what the hell?
Yeah. So, yeah, a lot of shit can kind of end that way. And then, the carnations are your cheap version of a rose. So I felt like he either saw their relationship as inferior in that way, or maybe because she was younger and he, like I had mentioned, liked that power dynamic, and was considering it more like surface level, more of a carnation, when she's seeing the relationship as more of a rose.
Right.
And the rubies is interesting too, because it can make a couple of different things of what she's talking about, the rubies that she gave up. I know there's some talk in the fandom of the scarf in All Too Well being a representation of maybe her virginity at the time. So maybe that's what she's referring to, like that ruby, that jewel of herself that she gave up. Or maybe it just is like the sanity of like herself in that, like what she lost in that relationship because she was in love with him. And I feel like maybe that was like her first real like in love. Like I feel like she had other relationships she was like infatuated with, and we talked and she, wrote songs about, but I don't know if it was like true love until like this relationship.
She felt like it was a really like grown up relationship. Yeah.
And, he couldn't say it back, because she says that in the 10-minute version, that he, wouldn't call it love.
And I Lost You, the one I was dancing with in New York, no shoes, looked up at the sky, and it was Maroon. This one, I don't know. I know we kind of don't think this is about Joe and all of that, but it did just make me think of daylight kind of turning red and like the sun kind of setting on their relationship a little bit. So I don't know, just a thought, but the burgundy on my t-shirt, when you splashed your wine into me, and how the blood rushed into my cheeks, so scarlet, it was Maroon. The mark that they saw on my collarbone, the rest they grew between telephones, the lips I used to call home, so scarlet, it was Maroon.
Yeah.
So she's saying Maroon now. More, like she says it 3 times in this chorus, whereas in the first chorus she only said it once.
Yeah, right at the end. Yeah, and I put like another classic Tay. She just switches up one word from I chose you to I lost you, and it completely changes the meaning and the direction of where this song is going. And I feel like when she's saying Maroon in here, it's almost like she's yelling at herself or like interrupting herself, like in the song, like she's saying like it was, and as she's saying was, it's like Maroon, and like it's almost like she's yelling at herself, like it's not red, it's maroon, like it's something darker, and she's like trying to like yell at her past self of how she's thinking of this relationship.
Okay.
Then we get into the bridge. I wake up with your memory over me. That's a real fucking legacy. And then she says it was Maroon in the background. I wake with your memory over me. That's a real fucking legacy to leave. I think these memories like were stirred up with the re-recording in Red, like I mentioned at the beginning, with them making and directing the All Too Well 10-minute version. So I feel like a lot of that was, that was a legacy. Like All Too Well is a legacy that is like will forever be in the fandom, will ever be just like a song that so many people can relate to no matter like, I feel like everybody at some point can feel themselves in that song. And now she seems a little bit like angry about also like that this legacy that is left like involves him. Like he's also part of this like legacy that like she can't get away from. And it means something different to her now. And she credits us for changing that song because now she can sing it without breaking down. But it, I don't know. How do you feel about that with that bridge and like what she's meaning about the legacy?
Yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. That song just became so much more than it originally was. Like I think that is probably one of the fandoms. Like if we could all agree on like a top 10 or something like that, that's probably in there for most people.
Yeah.
Which out of 200 and something songs, that's...
Yeah, and it's a 10-minute song. Like, this is a long song that we've all just... she put it in the Eras Tour, too, and one where, we know every single word to it.
Yeah.
For 10 straight minutes. And then the last two parts is the outro was Maroon. So she's only, we mentioned like she's only a little bit of time that she talks about actually mentioning Maroon. And it's really just layered over the verses. So she's, again, I feel like just reminding herself that it was Maroon. It was not red. It wasn't this bright, passionate love affair. It was something darker.
Yeah.